Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Razam Pereira. The US on Wednesday conveyed to India that it has postponed the 2+2 dialogue scheduled to be held next week in Washington due to unavoidable reasons. External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj and Defense Minister Nirmala Sitharaman were to travel to the US to take part in the meeting with US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and Secretary of Defense James Mattis on July 6th. This new dialogue format was agreed upon between the two sides during the visit of Prime Minister Narendra Modi to Washington in June 2017. After June last year, the two countries have tried to schedule the dialogue many times, with several dates having been considered. Earlier this year too, the 2+2 dialogue had been postponed due to uncertainty over the confirmation of Pompeo as President Donald Trump's new Secretary of State. Pompeo was later confirmed as Secretary of State in April. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze why New Delhi and Washington haven't been able to go through with the 2+2 dialogue. Joining me on the program today are Major General Ravi Arora, retired Chief Editor, Indian Military Review, and Ashok Sajanhar, former diplomat. Thank you to both my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Ambassador, let me begin with you first, of course. Why haven't we been able to finalize a date and go through with the 2+2 dialogue?
You know, the reason that has been given right now, when Secretary of State spoke to our External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj yesterday, he said it is for unavoidable reasons that they have not been able to.
And what are these unavoidable reasons?
Yeah, that is not known. And earlier, of course, when it was decided that the 2+2 dialogue will take place in April this year, but then it was postponed, it was because of a change in personnel. Rex Tillerson had been fired and Mike Pompeo had not been confirmed by the Senate as yet. So that was understandable to an extent. But now here coming so close, because the US itself announced the dates of the 2+2 dialogue less than a week ago. That was last Thursday. And now they are saying it is for unavoidable reasons. So I think it is disappointing, it is regrettable. And
could there be a change in mind as far as the Trump administration is concerned? Because we saw what happened with the North Korean leader. The talks were called off a day before, a day later they said that they're going to go through with the talks.
You know, well, of course, the Trump administration, particularly the president himself, to put it mildly, is mercurial and fickle-minded. So, you know, you cannot put anything above him. But of course, I would not suggest that relations between India and the United States are of the type that were between North Korea and the United States. Because India and the United States have a very strong strategic partnership that has been developing, that has been evolving for the last 17, 18 years. And I think today we find ourselves in a position where there are large number of areas where there is convergence of views, position, whether it is in strategic considerations, whether it is Indo-Pacific. United States has also made several moves even during President Trump's tenure, whether it was the South Asia strategy that was announced last year in August, or the national security strategy that was announced in December, or the use of Indo-Pacific when President Trump was traveling to Asia last year for participation in the East Asia Summit in Manila. So the manner in which he sort of, you know, rather than using Asia Pacific, he used Indo-Pacific. And then the revival of the Quad. More recently, the renaming of the Pacific Command to the Indo-Pacific Command.
Yes.
So there are a large number of small but significant steps that even the Trump administration has taken.
Yeah.
But, you know, at this moment, what are those unavoidable reasons? We can only speculate about that. And of course, I'm sure during the course of the program,
we will indeed go into those issues and we'll talk about. Yeah.
But at this moment, what I can say is that in my view, it is highly disappointing, and you know, it further enhances the lack of credibility of the Trump administration in following through whatever decisions it has taken to the logical conclusion.
Sure. You know, the Ambassador General pointed out the areas of convergence. There have been a few areas of divergence too, and we've seen them cropping up in the recent past. That having been said, do you believe that the bilateral ties between the two countries have had any bearing with the postponement of the 2+2 dialogue?
Depending on whom you speak to. Some will tell you it is because the Americans are now busy in organizing a meeting between Putin and Donald Trump, which is slated for 10 July. But when this 2+2 meeting was announced for 6 July, it's not just announced out of the blue. It's a series of interactions, and carefully, with a hard nose, everybody looks at it, whether the date is suitable. And having done that and then to go and cancel it, like I said, if you, depending on whom you speak to, if you speak to some people on the Indian side, they might tell you that the US and India are not on the same page as far as sanctions against Iran go. There are, of course, differences. Trump is turning out to be a disruptor of the world order, having now initiated steps with North Korea. We have to see how what it results into. Now he is turning his attention to Russia and Iran. Both these developments do not augur well for India. First is that we depend up to 62% of our defense supplies come from Russia, because overwhelmingly our defense equipment is from Russia. And 15% of our oil comes from Iran. So these are the two issues which are affecting this 2+2 dialogue. But also remember, it's significant that India and USA have had a mechanism earlier. It was called the Strategic and Commercial Dialogue. These two aspects are now being separated by having a separate commercial dialogue and a separate strategic dialogue. And this 2+2 is part of the strategic dialogue. So it does not so much affect the commercial aspects, and I would say the Iranian trade with Iran affects commercial aspects, and the strategic aspects are to do with the Quad, the Indo-Pacific, and the defense relationship.
Indeed. Let's talk about specifics now, Ambassador. Since the General brought up Iran and Russia, let's try and focus on Russia first, and then we'll move to Iran. Is the S-400 deal between India and Russia one of the reasons why the dialogue has been postponed?
That is what the speculation is. That is what one of the ostensible reasons is, that because India is importing or plans to import, or when the annual summit takes place in India in October, then two leaders, Prime Minister Modi and President Putin, are supposed to ink this agreement for purchase of 5 S-400 ballistic missile defense systems. So that is supposed to be, and it's a multi-billion-dollar deal. And the United States would like that rather than purchasing such systems from Russia, India should start purchasing these systems from the United States itself. So this is one of the ostensible reasons. But of course, if there are differences of views on some of the issues, like on this one, like on Iran, whether it is purchase of oil from Iran or it is India's investments or activities as far as Chabahar is concerned, I think those are issues which can be discussed, but summarily, deciding that the meeting will not take place, I think this is a very amateurish way and an undesirable way of going about it, because I would also like to suggest that there are so many other areas of agreement and on convergence on which we have been working, whether it is two of the other foundational agreements on which we had discussions have been going on. The Foreign Secretary and the Defense Secretary had traveled to Washington, National Security Advisor had traveled to Washington, and a lot of work has been done as far as this issue is concerned. There are so many other areas on which there is increasing convergence in, for instance, what has happened as far as the Trump-Kim talks on 12th June in Singapore. Some discussion on that. What is happening as far as the growing assertiveness of China is concerned? That is an issue that concerns both India and the United States. Again, discussions on Afghanistan, where India and the United States are on the same side. There is a convergence, there is agreement, there is concurrence. So these are issues where we can, we need to discuss, urgently discuss, and take these issues forward, rather than pick up one or two issues on which there is disagreement and summarily decide, unilaterally decide that we are not going to meet. I think this is speculation. We need to sort of, wait for a while longer.
Sure.
Because the reason, as General has said, it might be that, they are trying to put together meeting between Trump and Putin. But that also, since what the message it sends out is that the US gives greater priority to its relations with Russia than to India. And I think that is a very negative message both to India and to internationally, because United States expects India to be a strong partner when it is dealing with the increasing aggressiveness and belligerence of China in the Indo-Pacific region.
Talking about China, of course, we'll have to talk about whether the US is pushing China and India closer together. That, of course, later on in the program. But let me now introduce Mr. KP Nair, strategic analyst on the program as well. Before I come to you, Mr. Nair, General, as far as the S-400 deal is concerned, why is the United States opposed to it? What's the problem really?
Trump has announced America First policy. And it applies to defense sales also, in a big way. It's not just the S-400. We have to pay the Russians for the repairs which have been carried out to INS Chakra, the nuclear submarine, which is substantial. And there are many other purchases. And as long as this act called the Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act, or CAATSA, is in place, we cannot pay them in foreign currency, in specifically dollars. And so how are we going to pay the Russians who want hard currency for defense sales? 62% of our equipment is of Russian origin. We have to maintain it. These are legacy equipments. And the Russians have been more reliable in selling defense equipment to us. We cannot wish away this. But at the same time, we have purchased $100 billion worth of defense equipment in the last 10 years, out of which $15 billion has been from America. And this includes recent purchases. I'm talking about last 3 to 4 years. The C-130, C-17 planes, P-8I, maritime reconnaissance planes. They have now approved the Apache helicopters, Chinook helicopters. We have purchased the M777 ultralight howitzer, and we are going in for many more items. So those are expensive, but they are the best. They are high technology. America is a little miffed about the F-16 offer not having been taken up, but then they are offering 22 Guardian and Reaper armed UAVs, as also naval technology for our aircraft carriers. There is a lot to it, and we have to maintain a good relationship, a defense relationship with the Americans. We are not going to get such technology from the Russians.
Right.
Even if we do, we are disappointed with some aspects of Russian equipment. So it's not just the S-400 or some other equipment, but this is not the time to break off our defense relationship in any big way with the Russians and get into the American camp.
Sure. That having been said, Mr. Nair, the Russians have put us on a friend list, and we are part of those friendly countries that Russia wants to deal with. So how do we play the balancing act really between the United States on one hand and Russia on the other hand, because Trump does not want us to have any ties with Russia?
I joined the panel a little late, so forgive me if I am repeating what some of your other panelists have said earlier that I am not aware of. The friendliness towards India in Russia and the former Soviet Union is nothing new. It's very heartening to know that it has continued. Even if you go to the Urals, you will see, as Ashok will know, he's an old Russia hand. Even if you go to the Urals, you will find so many women with the name Indira. it's a relationship that has stood the test of time and will do so in future. So, but with reference to the subject of today's discussion, it is my feeling that too much is being made of this postponement of the 2+2 meeting in the media. You see, the Putin-Trump summit is going to take place, and before that there is the NATO summit. My feeling is that enough inputs didn't go into the scheduling. Maybe on our side, certainly on the American side, because they were the ones who should have brought it to our attention. And it is not surprising, given the state of Washington. Pentagon is understaffed. South Asia, we still have, we don't have an Assistant Secretary of State. I've said this before on your program. There was an acting Assistant Secretary of State, but she could only be kept there for a year without congressional confirmation. So the same lady has now been demoted to Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary. So in a setup where there aren't people who can take decisions, what can you expect? But this is also a problem of over expectations. I'm not saying in the government, in our public domain and all that, there is this feeling that has been artificially created, which is not true. As if India is the most important relationship for the United States, It is not. And it hasn't been even during Obama's time when things were stable. I remember last time this 2+2 thing was mooted during Obama's time. There were three things that concerned the Americans at that time. One was Iran, one was North Korea, the other was Ukraine. Ukraine has taken a backseat, but the other things have not changed. We have to be realistic in acknowledging that the concerns of the United States are not necessarily our concerns. So I do not think that this is set back as it is made out to be, the postponement of the 2+2 dialogue. It's just that scheduling problems are there, and I think it will take place later.
You're calling it a minor scheduling problem, and it could happen sooner rather than later, as soon as the dates are available, and it's not a big setback. Talking about the issues on the table as far as India-US are concerned, Ambassador Sajana, let's talk about the other problem now, Iran. Now, the Americans have said by November 4th, both India and China should stop getting oil from Iran. Are we going to toe the lines of the Americans? Is it going to be that easy for us? What's at stake there for us?
I don't think it's going to be easy, and particularly because, this is very, very different from what the diktat that had come from the United States pre-2015, when also there were sanctions on importing oil from Iran. And there, at that time, what the requirement was that there would be significant reductions on offtake of oil from Iran. Iran, at one point of time, used to be our largest supplier of oil, to the tune of about 500,000 barrels per day. Then, over a recent period, after the sanctions were introduced, it came down to about 300,000, then 240,000. And after the sanctions, now, we were planning to enhance it also to about 400,000 barrels per day. From the first position, it has fallen to the third position after Saudi Arabia and Iraq. But now this insistence that you go to zero, I think that will be extremely difficult to meet, number one. Number two, that it is a very, very short time that when we import about 15% of our total crude requirement from Iran, then from today, it is the end of June, beginning of July, over the next 3-4 months, you bring it down. I think India will also feel that it is really being pushed around, and this is it's an impingement on its own strategic autonomy to be able to take care of its own economic interests. After all, India is an energy deficient country. We need energy for our economic growth. So we cannot really be pushed around like this. But Frank, you would recall that in one of your programs recently, you know, when some of your other panelists had suggested that we could possibly seek a carve-out exception. And at that time, my view was that it will be very difficult for us to get a carve-out this time as against the carve-out that we were able to get last time, because this time the American president, Mr. Trump, he is really angling for a regime change in Iran, and he does not want to leave any levers or screws unattended to or loose. And so he is...
No compromise there as far as Trump is concerned.
No compromises, and that is why he says zero imports from there, which I think will be very difficult. And I think he is, by taking this position, he is really rubbing countries like India, China, South Korea, who have been importing from Iran, and before 2015 also importing significant quantities. We were importing about 190,000 barrels per day at that time. So I think he's really rubbing these countries the wrong way.
Indeed. You know, General, as far as, you know, Iran is concerned, ambassadors calling it a US diktat. If that's what it is, will India heed to it or do we ignore it?
See, firstly, as far as Iranian oil goes, it's not about paying them in dollars or rupees. Trump wants Iranian oil not to be imported by India or China or anybody else. He wants to really squeeze them. If it were only a matter of paying them, India could well afford to pay them in rupees, because our imports are about $12 billion from Iran every year, and our exports are $2.5 billion. There is a trade deficit, and we can work around it and pay the Iranians in rupees. We've done it in the past. We continue to do so to a certain extent even now. But banning the import of Iranian oil for India means quite a bit. Now, the second, it's not about oil alone. We have this north-south corridor and the Chabar port,
yeah, I was just
where
going to come
we
to that.
have
What happens to
already
Chabar?
invested $500 million worth. And there is the $1.6 billion worth of our railway line going to Afghanistan. So these are strategic projects. And then when you said what is on the table, this 2+2 dialogue was all about these things. These are the strategic parts. For America, the strategic part is the Indo-Pacific, which the External Affairs Minister has to discuss with them. And the Defense Minister has to discuss with them the defense purchases, defense exercises, and terrorism. So, but there is a way around it. Remember, we supported sanctions against Iran at the time when we wanted a civil nuclear deal with the Americans. So we had our compulsion and we explained it to the Iranians. They were quite surprised. But we managed to get over it. And now we have already started diversifying our sources of energy. 4 or 5 Indian companies have already invested in American shoal assets.
Right.
Of course, Indian companies have invested globally in, tapping oil sources. But we have already made a beginning. LNG has been imported. Shale gas has been, shale oil has been imported from America. And according to the International Energy Agency, our requirement is likely, our imports are likely to go up to about $2 billion worth of American oil and gas, LNG. Right now, as we heard, the Indian requirement is at the level of $60 billion or so annually. But again, it is predicted our requirement is going to jump 2 times by 2020 or so. So we have a big problem coming up. But America is also a reliable source of energy. So if we have started diversifying, we should look at not meeting the whole requirement. It may not be possible in the near future, but a large part of our energy requirements from America as well.
Sure. Ambassador, I'm just going to come to you. Before that, let me just hear out Mr. Nair as well. I'll let you close the show for us with your concluding remarks. But, as far as Iran is concerned, Mr. Nair, if India does not heed to the demands of the United States, do we face the trouble of sanctions ourselves?
If we handle it thoughtfully, we won't. The reason why I say this is the earlier round of sanctions. I was in Washington in those days and I was dealing with these issues at that time. We acted in concert at the time of the earlier sanctions with Japan and South Korea. And Japan at that time was importing 60% of its oil was coming from Iran. Now I don't know what's the level. And the Americans heeded to a joint effort by India, South Korea and Japan to give us time and reduce it in a phased manner, the import of Iranian oil. At the same time, I remember Nirmala Rao, who was our ambassador in Washington at that time, she was firm and forthright. She said that we are not going to abide by the American sanctions, unilateral sanctions. We will only abide by the UN sanctions. So you have to combine a bit of bluster and along with a very discretionary approach to this sort of thing. So I think that is what we would work. And I want to be the devil's advocate and suggest that, we have so much influence with the Israeli lobby in the US. We do so much for Israel in terms of arms purchases, giving Israel legitimacy in a sense in our region, which also has a large number of Muslim population in neighboring countries. We should use the Israeli lobby and tell the Americans that, through the Israeli lobby, like we have done on many other issues, the nuclear deal and all that, we have a genuine problem. We can't do this overnight. And I am sure that this is a strategy that will work. Although the Israeli lobby is opposed to Iran, I think they will have to weigh it against our interests and getting things done. And it may work. You see, Americans may not agree to us continuing forever purchase of Iranian oil. But I think they will take a reasonable approach like President Obama did if we use such out-of-the-box thinking.
Sure. Yeah, Ambassador, close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
Okay, just a few comments on this. Number one, as far as sanctions, if we continue to purchase oil from Iran, when the Iranian foreign minister was here recently, Javad Zarif, then our external affairs minister Sushma Swaraj had very categorically stated that we will not be cowed down by any unilateral sanctions of any country. We will only abide if the sanctions are imposed by the United Nations. So I think at the policy level, and last week she was also in France. There also, when she met her French counterpart, also she said that it is our intention to continue with the Iranian nuclear deal. Now, at political level, we might have that resolve. But I think at the technical and the operational level, how does it pan out? We'll have to see this. On the Chabahar issue, you might have seen the reports. Nikki Haley, the US PR to UN, is here. And she said that India will be allowed to go ahead with its construction and use and activities as far as Chabahar is concerned, because I think Afghanistan has a strategic significance and importance as far as America is concerned.
Right.
The last point on this is, if we continue, because now when there is the sort of a trade war between India and the United States, and the United States says that, we have a $22 billion trade surplus with them, then what we had said was that we are going to buy additional aircraft from them and additional oil from them.
Right.
So I think that will have the advantage to meet our energy security and also to reduce the trade surplus that we have with them. So I think we use all these avenues that are available to us to move forward.
Sure.
Because this is a very important and a significant partnership. For India, it might not be the most important, but it is a significant partnership for the United States also.
All right. On that note then, we'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's it from me. See you again next time.